Slowing down your speech is really important. I think as adults, we have conversations and we speak so quickly. But with a child, it's learning a new language for them. They need to be able to understand what you're saying. And if you just slow your speech down just a little bit so they can understand it, they feel more engaged.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. So many of our results in life are a product of our communication. From simple things like sharing what we want for lunch that day to the more complex tasks like inspiring others with a vision of the future, words and our use of language tend to do the heavy lifting. On the flip side, lack of communication earns its own set of results. Just ask anyone who has experienced a failed business, relationship, or lost opportunity because of poor communication. My guest today has dedicated 20 years to the field of speech pathology and recently wrote a book about how anyone with a child in their life can help them develop the language skills that will set them up for more confidence and success in their future. Jeaneen Tang's book is called Play Dumb and Sabotage, and she explains what it means to mindfully underestimate a child's needs in order to create opportunities to practice language. Jeaneen Tang, thank you for being here on A Joyful Rebellion today.
Thank you for having me, James.
It's going to be a fun conversation because you have worked on a brand new book that you got out. The title is Play Dumb and Sabotage. And I want to dive right into what that means and what led you to write that book.
Play Dumb and Sabotage, it's mindfully under-anticipating a child's needs and creating opportunities for them to practice language. And the basis of the book is I've been working in speech therapy for a really long time, over 20 years, and a lot of that time has been with children and early intervention. And what I've found, especially over the last handful of years since, COVID and everything, that we have a lot of children who are normal developing in every way, except they're delayed in language. And if their parents were educated better about how to interact with them, they probably wouldn't need the speech therapy that they require. I worked in special education for a really long time, and playing dumb with children as far as you know what they need, you know what they want to say, but if you kind of give them the time and give them the space to develop that communication, that's when they can really flourish and they can become more successful, independent communicators. So the sabotage part of it is creating opportunities. So for snack time, that's a great example. Kids love to have some kind of snack, right? And as parents, we're like, okay, we're going to give them their snack and here's a bowl of your goldfish, rather than here's a few goldfish and you need to ask for more. Like simple things of sabotage. Something like you might have a favorite toy that they love and you might put it in sight but out of reach. Or you may put something in a container that they can't open, so they need to ask, open this please, or more please, or something like that.
Right. So you're intentionally creating situations where they need to express themselves, they need to communicate. And it sounds like what some of this comes down to is the need for practice.
Yeah.
And if they don't have a reason to practice, they're not going to. If they don't have a need, they're not going to express themselves, because if the parent is taking care of every need, there's no point of them having to speak it. And if they don't speak it at an early age, they're less likely to develop that as they go forward. Is that correct?
Exactly. Like
Okay.
anything that we learn to do, it's with practice, right? Whether it's playing a sport, learning a new language, learning a new task at work, we have to be able to practice it. The more repetitions we get, the better we get at it. I think all parents, even myself, I went through, okay, we're in a rush to get somewhere. You're going to wear this outfit. I have all your toys. This is what you're going to do. And little things like when you're getting your child dressed, hey, do you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? and show them the vocabulary, right? You don't know something until you're introduced to it. So if you're not given that vocabulary, you're not taking that in and you're not able to express it. So as parents, like I had a set of parents who, they're great parents. They took care of their child's needs. They got them dressed, they got them fed, they made sure they weren't wet, but they didn't know that you needed to really get down to the child's level and to interact with the child so much in order for the child to interact back and have that understanding that this is a conversation, whether there's actual words going on or not. Any interaction you have with the child, I consider like a conversation, whether it's an exchange of facial expressions or vocalizations, if the child's still a little baby, right? My mom taught me at an early age to, make funny faces with children, to make sounds, and then to make them feel that they are being spoken with, and it's important.
It sounds like the parents who are trying to be diligent about giving their kids everything, providing for them all the things they would need, are in some ways doing them a disservice if they go overboard with it and don't let the child, even though the child might seem too young to have an opinion or communicate their wants, because how could a kid that young possibly know what they want? I'm the parent, I provide for them. So it sounds like in a lot of cases, those parents, their intentions are in the right place, but they are sabotaging their child's ability to express themselves later on. Is that going down the right path?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of my chapters is, you are a good parent. And it goes into, what do you think makes a great parent? And it's anticipating what your child needs. So in the book, Play Dumb, it's like, you know what the child needs, but reel that back, mindfully under anticipate. Know what they need, but let the child help to guide the conversation, make that decision.
Right. And don't assume because they are that young that they don't have preferences and they aren't able to communicate them. And I'm curious, it sounds like from some of the things I've read from your work, are we talking like 0 to 3 years old? What's the age range where this is most critical?
Definitely between 0 and 3 years old. It's like they're sponges, right? They come into this world. That's when they're going to be developing their language. By age 1, they should have lots of single words. By age 2, they're combining 2 words. By age 3, they're combining 3 or even more words. And sometimes parents become hopeful that their child's going to be normal developing and they caregive for their child really well. Then, the child's not speaking at 1, 1.5, even 2 years old. And the parents are in denial. They're like, well, no, they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. And then they're 2.5 and they're like, okay, maybe they need speech therapy. Maybe they need extra help. And by that time, when they get through the evaluation process for the 0 to 3 early intervention, they're almost 3. And the speech therapy that they probably needed a year ago, we're trying to cram it within that last 6 months, and then they might need to continue speech therapy after 3 in the regular educations, 3 and up. They might have to get special education because of it. As long as they're not thinking that they're in denial and that their child's going to be okay as long as they just continue to be doing the same thing, and really look at the child and say, wait, my child should be doing this at a certain age. It's okay to get some extra help now rather than wait another year.
Someone who's listening, who has listened to all of my other podcasts or even several of my other podcasts, A Joyful Rebellion is about that time in a person's life where they've done all the things they were told would make them successful in life, the things that they thought would make them successful, whether that's get the degree, get the job, get the family, and they get all of those outward signs of success and they don't feel it inside themselves, and they have to answer the question, okay, what am I going to do now to make myself happy? That doesn't always mean get rid of the job. You can't get rid of the degree once you have it, but a lot of people get to that point in their lives where they do have to pivot. And the reason I wanted to have this conversation is something that is so central to making that next leap, doing what I call the rebellion part, which is maybe go against what you've always known. These 2 things are really important, and that's confidence and communication, because you have to be confident enough to communicate
and you have to communicate to the right people to live the life you want once you realize something needs to change. The reason I was excited to have this conversation is because it goes way, 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 way back to those early years. Maybe your parents didn't give you the start that you needed. I know in my generation, there was a lot of playing dumb and sabotaging going on because parents just didn't have time for it. And it was like, you guys figure it out. We got the basic needs, but we either learned to fend for ourselves or we just figured it out or we asked for more. And that's a huge generalization. But I want to dive into first-time parent. First-time parent, they want to be the best and they want to do this right. They want to right all the wrongs that they feel like their parents, the disadvantages maybe they had. So they're going to be laser focused on doing some of the things that you say not to do, like anticipating all of their needs, not making them ask for anything. When it gets in that 0 to 3 range where there might be a need for speech therapy, how would they know? What are some of the signs and what are some of the developmental stages that you want to pinpoint and say, oh, they're not quite here yet? Is it just them or is it something we need to go ahead and address?
By 1 year, they should be saying their first words, right? A lot of first words between age 1 to 1.5. By age 2, you want to combine 2 words. So if the child isn't doing a lot of babbling before age 1, then that's a red flag, right? Because you want the child to be playing with their voice to kind of experiment and discover what sounds they can make. Because ideally, you want your child to be imitating you or other people. You want them to be imitating the intonation and the slight animation in their voice so they can be a communicator. So if they're not doing that and they're not speaking by age 1 and they're not starting to combine words age 2, that's definitely huge red flags. If they're not attending to you when you're playing with them or when you're moving around the room, if they're not tracking you and exploring their world, then that's also a red flag. If they're not attending, that could be more of a thing like, are they on the spectrum? Are they not? Are they in their own world? Is there something else going on? So there's normal developing children. There are children that definitely need speech therapy, children with autism, children with language delays, developmental delays. So I think having the strategies in my book and learning how to use those is great for not only normal developing children, but all children.
You're right when it comes to watching your child, and there are so many things going on in a parent's head. I've had 2 kids and they're older now, but I remember myself personally, my recollection of learning how to read was that I couldn't read. My grandmother would read me these little golden books all the time. And it just seemed like one day I could mimic and I could memorize all the words. And then another day I started to sync up the words with the sounds that were coming out of her mouth. And it was like I recognized all the words in that book, and it was like a light bulb went off. And I always wondered, would that happen? Because my youngest child, she never really loved to read. She loved to be read too, but she didn't like to read herself. And I thought, well, okay, maybe she's just a late bloomer, or maybe she's dyslexic. What is the deal? And so we're a little farther down the road in like 1st grade, 2nd grade, those times when these simple words should be easy. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, is this something we need to address? So I appreciate you going through, because as a parent, you don't know what to expect. You don't know what is the child. You don't know what is their environment. Are you not providing something that they need? Have you found some parents tend to overcompensate? Like they say, oh yeah, she's 1 and she does have a handful of single words, but my child should be doing sentences by now. Have you ever had that opposite end of the thing happen?
Not so much that extreme.
Okay.
Usually the parents are kind of given excuse like, oh, well, they are with grandparents a lot, or they do this a lot. Like they're like, oh, they're not talking because of this. It's almost like they're protecting themselves by giving the child an excuse why they're not talking. Oftentimes it's the parents who are such good caregivers. I think this generation of parents, you don't want your child to cry. You want your child to be taken care of, because maybe they had parents like your parents who like were too busy, or my parents. I was a latchkey kid for a long time. I caught the bus when I was in kindergarten, first grade. You go home
Yep.
and you take care of yourself. You do your home. You do everything by yourself. You learned how to do that. And when we become parents, we're like, well, we don't want that. We're going to pick our child up from school every day and drive them to school. And then we're going to do this and that. So it's like this opposite thing of we want to be the opposite of our parents. Or, some people had amazing parents and they want to be just like them. So it's whether it's you want to be different than your parents or you want to replicate your parents. There's something with this generation of parents these days. It's like we want to take care of our child, and our interpretation of taking care of our child is a disservice to our child, actually.
I'm seeing that fruit come on the tree myself, because you're right. First grade, 6 years old, walked like not in the snow. I didn't live where it snowed, and there were no hills. I was at the beach, but I still walked a mile each way. That was me at 6 going to school. And I literally had that little leather strap around under my shirt that had the key to get in the house and make a snack, whatever. It was always bologna rolled up with a slice of cheese that was snack, right? Which actually, that sounds really good right now, but you're right. So fast forward 30-something years, I pick up my kids from school, do all the things. Now, luckily, read to them and had a lot of conversations really young. So that wasn't on my radar about the speech. They were pretty vocal. What are some of the things that a parent, when they read through your book, what are some of the big takeaways that they're going to get from that? You mentioned doing some of the sabotage with giving them a few goldfish, making them ask for more. What are a couple more takeaways that parents will get when they read through your book?
One of the big things is don't ask a yes/no question unless you're willing to honor that no. I had to learn this as a new speech therapist many years ago, that if you ask a child, are you ready to do this? Or can you do this? Or would you like to do this? And they say no, then you got to honor that no. So how you get around that is offer choices. What do you want to have for a snack? Do you want to have this or this? Or we're going to do 2 things today. Which one do you want to do first? Do you want to take a bath or brush your teeth? Then offering the vocabulary. Do you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt? Or just continuing to provide those choices rather than, do you want to wear the blue shirt? Do you want to wear the red shirt? No. So
No,
you're never going to get to the answer, but if you offer them choices or you give them a direction, it's helpful in navigating their day. If I'm working with a child for articulation, I don't say, can you say giraffe? I'm like, giraffe, you say it. Or giraffe, your turn, say giraffe. So it's like, you don't ask a yes/no question unless, you really want to know. Like, are you feeling okay? Are you tired?
Yeah.
Are you hungry?
Yeah.
So ask a yes/no question when you really want to know the answer, yes or no. But if you want to ask a question as far as like, are you ready to clean up? Are you ready to brush your teeth? And they say no, then you got to honor that no. So that's one big thing. Then also, I think just slowing down your speech is really important. I think as adults, we have conversations and we speak so quickly. But with a child, it's learning a new language for them. They need to be able to understand what you're saying. And if you just slow your speech down just a little bit so they can understand it, they feel more engaged and they're able to understand you better. They know that you are not rushing through communicating with them, because children want to be interacted with. I see a number of kids at a preschool and I show up and all my kids are like, I'm ready. I want to play. And then they're just rushing to me. I'm like, well, I'm not ready for you yet, but they're all ready to play because they want to feel special. And they feel special in speech therapy because it is all about play when they're that young. You're interacting, you're getting down to their level, you are slowing down your speech and getting into their world. Then also be super animated and don't be afraid to be silly. Because kids, when they're little, all they want is imagination. And they want to play and they want to know that they are part of this conversation and interaction. And the more you play and interact with them, the more they're willing to step out of their little comfort zone, right? So like my son is special needs. He had a brain injury and stroke when he was 13 months old. And, he wasn't a strong reader until like the third grade. We really struggled with reading up until the third grade, and something clicked with him then. I think it was like a confidence thing. And there was also a time where he jumped from Dr. Seuss books to easy chapter books. Like he loves the bad guys, the movie, the bad guys with the cartoon and all these characters. And it's a thick, 68 pages, and that's a lot for a little child. But he was so diligent and loved the movie. He had heard somebody read it on YouTube, and that's helpful for him, hearing it. And then he sees the words and he's like, I know those words because I've heard it before. And then he would sit there and he would read the book in one sitting. It would take him like an hour and a half, but he was like, I like this book. I know how to read the words, and I'm going to read it, and I'm going to do all the voices. And at some point, he just became so confident as a reader. So I think that's also with kids, they learn how to be a little bit more confident every time, and they really experiment with what they're saying. Before you know it, they're confident communicators.
Something you said just a minute ago sparked in my brain and made me wonder how media plays into all of this. So if one of the things you want to do is create situations where the child is expressing themselves in not just yes, no kind of situations, and you want them to be able to hear language and be able to mimic some of the language that they hear and have those conversations, for parents who allow their kids who are 1, 2, 3 years old to watch a lot of television, even if it's age-appropriate shows or videos, how does that factor into the development of their language? Does it help it? Does it hurt it?
I think there are a lot of really great educational, interactive shows out there. I like when the parent is also with the child watching these things together, because I know parents are busy. And oftentimes the child gets sat in front of the TV and they just are watching these shows while the parents are doing, house chores, whether it's laundry, whether it's something else. The real gem of those shows is generalizing it in the home. And if the parents aren't there to comment on it, to practice that same stuff with the child, then it's really lost. It's really lost its purpose, its overall purpose. Because the child is watching it, they might get some practice. If the show is interacting, they might say, oh, say this and watch this and do that. So the child is watching everything, and they might get some communication from that. But I think to expedite it even further and make it go, exponentially faster, the parents really need to be there as well and watch it with the child, comment about it, practice it with the child there, and then also throughout the day. So you can watch something like a show and then find another situation throughout the day, like, oh, this is similar to what we saw, then generalize that into their own day. So I'm not saying, don't watch television or don't watch YouTube or don't watch all this stuff. It's using it purposefully and practicing it with your child. I think that's really the key.
Got it. And when it comes to any issues with speech, it sounds like it's just like any other issue with anything. The earlier you catch it, the better chance you have of correcting it sooner. Is there a point in development that it becomes very difficult as a speech therapist to take the patterns, the habits that have been going on for a while, and then transform them into something that's going to make the person more confident in their communication? Is there an age where you're like, oh, this is going to be a tough one?
I think the closer to age 3, 4, 5, I think that's more difficult if you start them later. And it's not so much the child per se, but also training the parents, because the parents have been doing the same thing for that many years. And as adults, it's harder to learn a new habit, how to interact with your child. So I think it's not so much the child is unable to do something correctly as far as like learning language better. It's more, can the parent take the strategies that we're introducing and practice them on a daily basis with their child? Because, as speech therapists, we meet with the child once or twice a week, typically. Then everything else, we give the homework to the parents, we give them the strategies, and it's really up to them to help to generalize that every day at home. Sometimes with articulation kids, definitely the older they are, the more practice they have with the arid sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have a child right now who's 4 going on 5, and he has a lot of errors in his sounds. So with articulation, it becomes rather difficult because the child has been practicing those speech habits, those articulation habits for that many years.
Okay.
But the language part is not as difficult, I think, for the child.
Well, that leads me to the next thing that just popped in my brain, but we've been talking about kids from 0 to 3 and what they should have happen. Now, after age 3, a lot of times kids will be going to preschool and they're around a lot of other kids. Does that help if they have language issues, or does that just magnify the issues they have when they get around the other kids and they're all sort of babbling and trying to communicate with each other and share toys and do all the things that preschool kids do? How does that affect things?
I think being around what they call typically developing children is very helpful because they're having more exposure to modeling, right? When you go to a preschool, there's going to be a lot more typically developing children than not, right? So you're going to have a lot more models from your peers, and modeling from your peers is way more important to the child than modeling from adults, right? They're in their peer group and then they see these children, requesting for a toy, or they're requesting for more snack, or they're expressing their needs and wants. They're getting that exposure. And on the other hand, there is that, when they're 2, because preschools, daycares start at 2 years old a lot of times, maybe younger, and they go into 3. The one I see kids at, they go from 2 to 5. So it's between 2 and 3 and 4, they're not sharing. So they also get into the whole, mine. If the child can't talk, it goes into the snatching or maybe hitting the other child. They don't mean to, they just don't have the words to do it.
Right.
So there's more opportunities to practice the language, definitely, because there's so many other kids to interact with. They do get the modeling from other children. And then they also get the structure of classroom, right? The teachers are there, the structure of the day. And hopefully, if they aren't on track for their speech, that they are red flagged by the school to say, hey, maybe you need to get some speech therapy. And the preschool that I see kids at, they're great with giving me children's names, or like, hey, can you screen this child? They might need speech therapy. Or can you talk to these parents because, so-and-so is not talking and the parents have been a little resistant on our suggestion of speech therapy. Can you tell them, what speech therapy is about? It's not the plague. Parents are like, oh, my child is fine. They don't need speech therapy because they don't understand.
Yeah, that can be sensitive.
Yeah, it's a very sensitive subject. I've had parents who, they were very resistant at first. And once the child was actually starting to communicate, they're like, we're really glad we started.
That's a great point, because parents don't want to think there's anything wrong with their kids. And then when you point that out, it almost, I would imagine, feels like an attack on them because they haven't provided something. Otherwise, their child would be typical. And that makes me curious, what does it look like? Because you've been a speech pathologist for over 20 years, right? So I'd imagine you have seen, or some of your colleagues have seen, cases where this wasn't addressed early in childhood, may not have been addressed at all. What does a 30, 40, 50-year-old person who never had their speech issues addressed, what is that person like?
Oh, I would say they're not as confident communicators as we would hope them to be. If their articulation wasn't addressed, then, I've had friends who are in their 20s and 30s who have articulation problems. I moved to Los Angeles to do acting from Hawaii. So I was in a theater group, and I had a friend who, she had a lateral lisp. So she would talk like this all the time. And so
Okay.
I was like, oh, you're going to be you never want to say, hey, you have articulation problems. You don't want to point that out to somebody because you don't want to give them confidence issues. But she herself came to me and was like, I looked on your biography and it said, you are a speech therapist. Can I work with you? And I was like, yes, I will definitely work with you.
You're like, I've been waiting for you to ask for so long.
We did a really great job. It took a while because it is like a habit, articulation is a habit that you build for many, many years. And she is a more confident speaker because of it, I think, now. And she's doing great. I've seen young adults, not so much in their 30s and 40s, but definitely young adults in their 20s who don't have the language foundation, and they just become very shy. They're not confident. They don't know how to interview for jobs, and they might seek out speech therapy as an adult, because at some point you do know that you need assistance. And hopefully at some point, somebody else in your life, whether it be a family member or friend or your doctor, who says, hey, you might benefit from speech therapy. So hopefully there are not so many adults in their later years that still need speech therapy. But I think definitely through their childhood, adolescence, and young adult life, I think that's when most speech therapy is recommended and actually sought after.
That's a great way of putting it. Do you have a story from your book that's one of your favorite stories of either transformation from when you had someone come in and maybe the parents were like, we just don't know what's going on. And then it sounds like there's a transformation that has to happen with the parents just as much as the child. Do you have a favorite story?
I worked with this little girl, and I used to call her Pigpen. Pigpen.
Yeah.
From, Charlie Brown, where they just roll around and you're just like, oh,
the dust cloud.
It's like, what's going on?
All over the place.
So this child, she would have these big tantrums at the preschool. She could not express herself well, and she would just like go from 1 to 100 level, having this like meltdown on the ground and rolling around. In my mind, I was like, oh, she's like Pigpen, rolling around. And that went on for a while, and I didn't interact with the mother. I see some of the parents, but I didn't interact with the mother one-on-one until later on. And I think they just did not understand the need for speech therapy at the time. And then she was 3. I think she had just turned 3. And the school was like, can you please talk to so-and-so's parents about speech therapy, because they weren't as receptive before, but now that the child is 3, they might be more open to doing that. So I did speak with the mom, because she was the one who was more active, bringing her to the preschool and everything. And we did speech therapy for a number of months, and I'm very happy to say she's a more confident speaker. I haven't seen her roll around on the ground since she was 3, because she doesn't have to have those tantrums, because those tantrums are really a result of her not being able to communicate, not being able to regulate her emotions, right? You get so frustrated that she's like, the only thing she could do was, I'm going to just throw myself on the ground and create this excitement around me so people pay attention to me, because I need something, but I just can't express it. So now she's super confident. And one of the strategies for her, I was telling the mom, I was like, she loves singing and she loves Disney, but sometimes the words were just so jumbled. She would have the tune, you'd hear like, oh, that's the song from whatever movie. And I was like, go home and just be in a musical theater. Pretend you're in musical theater and you are over exaggerating these words, you're stretching it out, stretching out the sounds, making gestures and body motions to go along with the song. And it really helps to solidify the language part of it, because then more clear words come out. Because if we think about language being on the left side of the brain and music being on the right side, and you blend those together, you can really think about like how you can remember a song that you learned in elementary school, but you can't remember a speech you had to write in college or something like that. So it's like okay, I remember that. And then you can apply almost any nursery rhyme, and you can apply whatever you want to say in that nursery rhyme. So you can incorporate something to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, or Wheels on the Bus, or Mary Had a Little Lamb, and you can change the words, the sentence that go with that tune, and it'll help the child remember what you're trying to work on at that time, whether it's to clean up their toys or feed a puppet a pretend cookie or whatever it is. Like you can say, eat the cookie, chomp, chomp, chomp. It's just like simple things, and just being playful and using music and language to incorporate that. Everly, she started out being this child I would call Pigpen in my mind, and now she's the little Disney princess. So
That's a fun story with a lot of info packed into it. If someone does want to check out what you do, check out the book, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
They can go to my website. It's playdumandsabotage.com.
All right.
They could also go on my Instagram. It's playdumandsabotage, or my personal one is at JT808.
Fantastic. Jeaneen, thank you so much for being here. This was great information. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to talk about?
Just to reiterate how important language and communication is at an early age, and how the strategies in my book, they're super, super simple, and they're applicable to every parent, every caregiver, teacher, and educator that interacts with children. So super easy.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for being here, sharing your wisdom, and I really appreciate it. Thanks for being here on A Joyful Rebellion.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for spending time with me today. And a big shout out and congratulations to Juliet, all the way across the country on the left coast. She's a longtime listener, and she entered to win the book that we were giving away. It's called Fuquay Varina, Ghosts, Legends, and Lore. And I'm going to be shipping that book out to you really soon. This is the first you're hearing about it. So congratulations. For everyone else, be sure to come back next week. We'll have a fresh episode, lots of things to learn and explore and think about. And until then, I hope you have a great rest of your week.